Alive, 617-396-4958. That is the number if you'd like to join the conversation. 617-396-4958 is the number. And let me just see, can I record? Yeah, record on computer, done. I'm ready to roll. Thank you very much for joining me, everyone. This is Charles Moscowitz. I'm doing the program Monday through Friday, 12 noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I think that from what I've been told, I'm the only person right now who is actually doing a live program with phone calls online. And I can take calls, and I'm hoping to build a live audience. Already have done as such. I started Monday, and I'm determined to, and I'm dedicated to doing this Monday through Friday at 12 noon to 1 or longer, depending upon calls. You're welcome to join the conversation. What's on your mind this afternoon? 617-396-4958. That's 617-396-4958. Let me just fix my comb over a little bit there. Look, I'm going to, I don't even really want to discuss per se, although I suppose we have to, this really disgusting and loathsome attempt to stab President Trump further in the back by trying to impeach him again on nothing, a phony impeachment in his last week, assumedly in office. It's ugly, it's spiteful, it's vindictive, and it really is an attempt to not only bury him and his legacy and the possibility that he may come back, which I think they really fear, but it's also an attempt to destroy the rest of us. And I think we are entering into some very troubling times. I will say, for the record, that I don't know, frankly, in the present atmosphere that we're in, whether or not I'll be here doing this again tomorrow. I don't know. Tomorrow morning, I might wake up and find that all of my media has been canceled. I don't know. This is if they can cancel the president of the United States, and they can cancel some significant American patriots like Sidney Powell and General Michael Flynn off of Twitter, and are they, doing anything wrong other than expressing themselves? Then they can cancel a little, a little yokel like me in 2 seconds, and nobody would even notice. So that's where we are. I don't know where to proceed with that. I mean, I have no control over that. They are using really hateful terms, lies. Somehow now we're all insurrectionists, right? We're terrorists, I was told. The other day, somebody sent me a TikTok saying I'm a terrorist. Why? They didn't explain. I guess that now to support President Trump, to believe and to claim and to argue that the election had been stolen, that is the equivalence of terrorism. Now, let me just be clear about that question, and that is that while it appears to me that personally and from my own observation that the election was stolen, and while we're never going to really know for sure, because I would suggest there was a conspiracy on the part of the media, on the part of the courts, both state and national and Supreme Court, and on the part of state governments, and finally of Congress, to not allow the evidence to be presented in its proper forum, which would have been in a courtroom or would have been on the floor of Congress. We're never going to get that. So we're never really going to have the debate and the evidence presented in its proper forum, and we'll never have real resolution in terms of the degree by which the election was either stolen or it wasn't stolen. We're not going to get that, so it's been blocked. So anybody who tells you, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist, you don't know what you're talking about, you could just point out that we're never going to know for sure because the ability to get the evidence presented in its right forum has been prevented. And that's where I am with it. But having said that, I will support whoever is inaugurated next Wednesday, whether it be Donald Trump or Joe Biden. That person, at that point, when they take the oath of office, that person will be my president, whether it be Donald Trump or Joe Biden, whether the election was stolen or not. At that point, we have to recognize that this is our government and we have to accept it, in my opinion. So if Biden is if he is inaugurated, then he will be my president, and I will go into a loyal opposition. I will praise him when he does right, and I will criticize him when he's wrong. But I will not say, I'm not going to do like what the communist left did. He's not my president, which is what they said about Trump. Even though in the case of Donald Trump, there was no controversy over the fact that he did win. I mean, that wasn't even, a controversy. They just decided out of whim that they would not recognize him. I won't be accepting somebody who steals. Okay, fine. No, they are entitled to that. I'm reading a TikTok. I don't accept the theft, but I accept the fact that we have to have a consistent government, and I will oppose it in every way I can. I want to make sure I will continue to talk out about the steal. I will continue to ask people who understand this to speak out about it, and hopefully continue with lawsuits. I hope to have on this program, and I'm sure I will have on this program in coming weeks, Sidney Powell and General Michael Flynn and Rudolph Giuliani and and all of the rest of the people Joe DeGeneva, all the people that are sort of on the inside on this and who know what's going on. I will have them on this program and we'll ask them and we'll try to get to the bottom of the evidence. I will never give up on that. I'm getting texts from Restream. You're going to support a communist puppet? I'm not going to support the president. I'm simply going to acknowledge the fact that he is the president. We have to have a president. I'm not an anarchist. I don't support it. And I will fight with every ounce of my being to oppose any hint of communist movement forward. And I expect it's going to be a very difficult fight. So anyway, you're welcome to join the conversation, by the way. This is a live program and we do take calls. And if you call, you will be heard. 617-396-4958. What is on your mind? 617-396-4958. Now, I am almost ready to publish a short book, basically a pamphlet or a novella on the election, my views on the election and why I think it was stolen and what that means. And in the appendix to the book, I will be republishing the incredible inaugural address delivered by Donald Trump on January 20th of 2017. To my way of thinking, this speech, which should be read by every high school student, it should be read by every legal student, every law student, every American should read it. It's simple, it's direct, it's classic Trump. He doesn't engage in the usual totalitarian language that we're used to from both parties, the sophistries, the double talk, the lies. He speaks plainly, he's honest, he's basic, he's truthful. That's what the left hated about Trump. They complained that he was a liar, and yes, he sometimes would tell what Mark Twain called a stretcher. When he described Tom Sawyer, he would tell a stretcher, a tall tale. But they were harmless stretchers. They weren't damaging. They weren't the kinds of lies that we're used to hearing from the deep state. Like, if you like your healthcare plan, you can keep your healthcare plan. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Or lies like the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which turned out to be a hoax and which got us involved in the Vietnam War, leading to 50,000 American deaths. Or the lies told by Wilson and FDR with regard to keeping us out of those wars so they could get reelected, knowing that they would get in the war. Those are big lies. Those are the kinds of lies that the authoritarian left tells. Trump was honest in that regard. That's why they hated Trump, because he was honest, not because he told the occasional fib, which I think was bad. I don't think he needed to do that because there's so much about him that is bigger than life. I mean, his story, his accomplishments, that he didn't need to resort to that. And it did show kind of a weakness on his part. I mean, no one's perfect. But the honesty of him was amazing. It is something, and his inaugural address is something that we ought to read as a blueprint to go forward in these very, very difficult and perilous times. And so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it and I'm going to comment on it. And while I do so, I should add that, if you want to interrupt me and give a phone call, I'll take the call. You're welcome to do it. And if you'd like to do that, we're at 617-396-4958, and I will take your call. You will be heard on the program. Agree or disagree, no problem. I don't mind opposition. I'm not one of those types who's going to screen any call. I welcome any and all phone calls. And I'm doing this every day, by the way, Monday through Friday. And by the way, we might have Michael Shaw coming on briefly to join us, and he's a science writer. He's a chemist. He's written extensively on the COVID-19 virus. He's also joined me in many conversations about the election. So he's always got some great insight. So I think he's going to be up on the program probably at the top of the next hour, I would guess. So anyway, 617-396-4958 is the number. 617-396-4958. So here's Donald Trump's inaugural address, and it is very powerful and very moving. We, the citizens of America, are now joined in a great national effort to rebuild our country and restore its promise for all of our people. Together, we will determine the course of America and the world for many, many years to come. We will face challenges, we will confront hardships, but we will get the job done. Every 4 years, we gather on these steps to carry out the orderly and peaceful transfer of power. And we are grateful to President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama for their gracious aid throughout the transition. They have been magnificent. Thank you. Today's ceremony, however, this is the key. Today's ceremony, however, has very special meaning because today we are not merely transferring power from one administration to another or from one party to another, but we are transferring power from Washington, D.C. and giving it back to you, the people. Now, let me just opine on this a little bit, because it's this one sentence that holds the crux of why the deep state, which is what President Trump accurately calls it, the swamp, why they were so pathologically opposed to Donald Trump every single day that he was in office. Indeed, every single day since he descended from the escalator at Trump Tower in the summer of 2015, along with Melania, to announce his candidacy. They hate and they fear Trump for a lot of reasons. Firstly, for personal reasons, because Donald Trump's ascent to office threatened their money, threatened their power, threatened their position, threatened their entire worldview, their ideology. He was transferring power away from this growing, informal, bureaucratic, administrative state, as it was called by Steve Bannon. And he was returning those sovereign rights to the sovereign people of America, where it belongs. He was returning the country to its constitutional condition, to its natural condition. He was reasserting the basic American political philosophy which is that rights come from God and not from the state. The Thomas Jefferson laid it out in the Declaration of Independence. We're endowed by our Creator, not by the state, with certain unalienable rights. Unalienable means that they can't be compromised, they cannot be tampered with. And thus, the American system was established on an idea that was not only different than all other governments and ideas that had existed before that, but it was the closest thing to what is the best and natural condition for humanity. That rights do not come from a state, do not come from an elite, an aristocracy, whatever you want to call it, that doles out rights as privileges, as favors to those whom they like and whom they support and who furthers their power, and withholds those same rights from those who oppose them. And they have the right to, they feel the right to punish them. I mean, it's the whole concept of the divine right of kings. They feel that they are God's representatives on earth. They can wield this power. And they have done so by fiat from the beginning of time. And the entire struggle of man, going all the way back to the beginning, has been to become aware of and to become conscious of our natural sovereign rights under God. And this country, this republic, was the first public expression of that idea. Donald Trump was bringing us back to that principle. He's returning those powers to the people. He was an ordinary businessman. He was not part of this corrupt establishment. He was a multimillionaire who didn't need to take money from them. I mean, unlike so many other of our political leaders, whether it be the Clintons or Obama or all of them. I mean, they all got well, not so much the Bushes, but I mean, certainly Joe Biden and his family. They all got rich from using their public office. Well, Trump didn't need to do that. He didn't need special interests because he was already rich. The United States as a corporation, I believe it is going to be dissolved. Well, first of all, the United States is not a corporation. The United States is a contract between the sovereign people and a limited government, and that contract is the United States Constitution and the Declaration of Independence as the preamble. So that, it's been compromised. We could talk a little bit about the history of how that happened, and I'm going to do that right now, because to go back to what President Trump tried to do, which was return the power to the people, he was going up against this, what he calls the deep state accurately, and what he calls the swamp. And it was that deep state, that swamp, that has been enthroned in this country going back to the election of 1912 and the advent of Woodrow Wilson, who was the first self-described socialist president who changed everything in his first year in office. He implemented the Federal Reserve Act. He implemented the direct income tax amendment. He eventually implemented World War I and its martial law, and a lot of other things. I mean, it changed America for the worse, in my opinion. And it removed powers from the sovereign citizen. Since then, we have struggled to get it back. Other historic events that furthered this socialistic and internationalist agenda, by which we have surrendered our sovereign rights as citizens, include the emergency legislation that was enacted by Franklin Roosevelt in response to the Depression, the implementation of the United Nations Charter at the end of World War II, the implementation of the national security state by President Harry S. Truman in 1947, when he set up the CIA and the DIA and the National Security Council, These organizations established what President Trump calls the deep state. By the way, there's a very good book called The Double State by Professor Michael Glennon of the Fletcher School of Law Diplomacy. I interviewed him. He didn't agree with some of my conclusions, but he respected them, and he's a great guy. But he's like an establishment figure. I mean, he worked as a legal counsel for the US Senate during the Clinton years, and I think he also worked for the Bush administration. And it's kind of like we're not talking here about some, you know, tin hat, conspiracy theorist like that. It's like I've been described. We're talking about an establishment figure. And his book talks about how the creation of the national security apparatus in the late 1940s by executive order of Harry Truman, and Truman didn't necessarily intend this, but this is how it happened, resulted in this huge, massive, expanded deep state that operates informally, that uses government power without being elected. We don't know who these people are. We don't generally know their identity, and that they wield government. They make laws without the approval of the people, which is the only legitimate body that can make laws in this country are the US Congress and state legislators and local city councils, because those are bodies that are elected by people to represent them. And they are the only entities given that kind of prerogative to make decisions, to make laws. And then you have governors and presidents operating as an executive to sign into law those laws, but they don't actually make laws. The laws are made by legislators. And what's happened since the election of 1912 is that the ability and the function of making law has been transferred gradually to unelected bureaucracies and even international authorities like the United Nations and the NGOs and other groups, and even private business organizations, which have made laws and called them something else: directives, guidelines, all these euphemisms. And it's done without the consent of the governed. It's done, usually in their interests, and their interests are a combination of this desire for power that represents a darker side of human nature, and that being fiat power, not legitimate power within the confines of a constitution. Or they're in it for the money, as in the case of multinational corporations who don't have any loyalty to any government. They have loyalty to themselves and their owners. Or you have people who are mentally ill and they believe in some kind of utopia, that things like national sovereignty and localism and democratic rights and private property ownership and faith in God and family and love and commitment and contractual relationships, that these things are superstitions. They're anachronisms that should be abolished gradually. This is what has controlled Washington. This is what has controlled our government, and increasingly the high ground of our culture since the election of 1912. There have been presidents who opposed it. I think that Warren G. Harding opposed it, and he died in office. I think that John F. Kennedy opposed it, and he died in office. And I think that to a certain extent, Ronald Reagan opposed it, not totally, but somewhat. He was shot. And I think that Donald Trump, of all of them, most vigorously opposed it, and posed as the biggest threat to their fiat power. And in that capacity, they went after him from the minute, as I say, he stepped off the escalator. They could not control Trump because Trump was a self-made man. He wasn't beholden to any special interest. He didn't have to answer to anyone because he didn't need anything from anyone. He was a successful businessman. He was famous. Had a great family. He had all the things in life you could possibly want. He wasn't in it for any ulterior motive. He couldn't be blackmailed. I mean, for God's sake, they put everything about him out there, and it just sort of, he was like, yeah, right, I'm a human being. I'm not perfect. And so, as such, he posed as a genuine threat to their power and their demented view of how things should go in the world. And that is, I think, why they went after him. And he meant what he said when he talked about returning power to the people and how both political parties have become essentially rubber stamps for this unelected, bureaucratic, internationalist cabal. So I'm going to read on a little bit here. And by the way, I'm reading the inaugural address that President Trump delivered in 2017, and I would suggest everyone read it. I mean, it's available, it's online. I'd like to see you have your high school son and daughter read it. Ask your high school civics class to study it. Every American should read this because this is the blueprint not only for where we are as a country right now, but where we need to be going forward in a time where I think power is again being transferred back to this unelected bureaucracy, this deep state, and as such, our individual liberties and our futures are under serious threat. So going back, and by the way, you're welcome to join the conversation. We're doing open lines here. 617-396-4958, 617-396-4958. Come on down. So back to the speech. For too long, those in politics have reaped the rewards of government while people have borne the cost. Washington flourished, but the people did not share in its wealth. Politicians prospered, but the jobs left and the factories closed. The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. All that changes starting right here and right now, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you. It belongs to everyone gathered here today and everyone watching all across America. This is your day. This is your celebration. And this, the United States of America, is your country. I feel like I'm tearing up as I read this. I believe that the fact that this speech was delivered and the fact that we did have 4 years of what I would suggest is the most successful presidency, possibly since Lincoln, in any objective metric you can name, we could point to that. And more philosophically, more culturally, the fact that this presidency did exactly what the deep state feared it would do. And by the way, if the deep state hadn't been so fierce, we can only imagine how successful this would have been. I mean, this was under siege did these successes take place. It would have been astronomical what could have been done. I mean, this is what is really sad about this. I mean, the opportunities and the abilities to move forward here was so enormous for all of us, and it's all over. I mean, they succeeded in stopping it for now. Although let's continue to talk about that. But the point is that, where was I? I mean, I kind of am losing my train of thought here. Um, the thing is that, that most people, I think, in the course of this past 4 years, have woken up. Enough of us have, that they have woken up the sleeping giant, as Yamamoto said. I have a great quote here from him. He was the Japanese admiral who masterminded the Pearl Harbor attack. He says, this was in his diary, Izoku Yamamoto, quote, I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve. Yes, indeed. The sleeping giant is awake. We are woke in the real sense, and they know it. And I think the fact that Trump won the election and probably won the popular vote is all the more evidence of this. And we ain't going away. They can censor us. I don't know what they have in mind. I mean, there are people who are talking about, there was this one guy who apparently was talking about sending the children of Trump supporters to re-education camp. Does that surprise me? Should we be concerned about that? Oh, no, that could never happen in America, right? Did we ever think in America that we would have, in the name of a virus, which is a terrible disease, certainly, people being put into a medical, martial law where they would be locked down and that they couldn't go out, or they could face criminal charges? We could have governors taking over like fascistic powers to arbitrarily decide how this is enforced. I mean, we could look at examples, and in particularly the blue states, we could point to Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan deciding, well, we're going to ban the purchase of gardening utensils and seeds, but we're going to allow booze and lottery tickets. I mean, it's arbitrary powers, and we've gotten used to that. We've gotten used to this total lockdown. It's still going on now. Now there are people who are talking about, if anything, expanding it. And then we have, over the summer, the really strange and inverse phenomena of gangs, basically looting Black businesses, burning Black neighborhoods, murdering Black people, particularly children included. And all of this is, we're told, is standing up for the civil rights of Black people. Really? I mean, it's almost like a strange juxtaposition, and that was completely supported by liberal left politicians like my own state House member, Ayanna Pressley, who said we should have more protests, so-called, or Vice Presidential nominee Kamala Harris and others who said, oh, this is all good. You know how many Black businesses may never recover from this, and had their entire enterprise destroyed, and we're all told that there was something good about this. Oh, that's not insurrection. That's not terrorism. And then, of course, the third event was the stealing of the election. And now we're being told that we're enemies of the people. It's not a surprise. This is overreach. I mean, they feel drunk with power. I mean, they feel intoxicated. If they can steal an election, if they can get everyone to be locked down, if they can loot neighborhoods, then why not? Why not take the next step and declare us all terrorists and insurrectionists and have us removed from, at least, the public space of being able to at least communicate, the means of communication. Look up the dictionary definition of socialism, at least before they tried to change it in the newer dictionaries. Public ownership of the means of communication, public ownership of the means of production, public ownership of the means of distribution. That's what socialism is. That's what National Socialism is, essentially. And, of course, some people are going to say, oh, well, I mean, these companies are private companies. Well, I have news for you. The definition of fascism is when you have certain select private companies operating in tandem with a government at the expense of their competitors and at the expense of the citizens to run the public sphere. That's what fascism is. Mussolini's government, instead of having a parliament or a Congress, he had a council of corporations, companies, so-called private companies. These companies were invited into the council because they were doing the bidding of the fascist dictator. They were in cahoots. I mean, they worked in combination with each other. They yielded monopolistic powers. But what do you think is going on now with Google and Twitter and Apple banning the president of the United States, taking down Parler, which was a competitor and which allowed more freedom of speech? I mean, I'm looking at my TikTok channel every day and seeing the people I'm following, and I'm seeing percentages of them have been removed. I'm just waiting for them to remove me. I suppose that might be inevitable. That's why, by the way, I'm doing these multiple streams with the hope that if they take one down, I can still have the others. I'm determined to move forward. I want to do this every day, as long as I have some venue to do it. And I suppose if they take them all away, and they'll just pull the plug, then I don't know, maybe I'll stand out on the street corner with a bullhorn. I don't know. I mean, this is what we're dealing with. This is the definition of fascism. Companies like Google and companies like Twitter, they know they can get away with this because they know, and they're emboldened by the fact that the incoming administration is not going to do anything about it, and that implicitly they're going to be in cahoots with them, right? That is what fascism is. It is not outright public ownership like they had in the Soviet Union. It is more of a public-private partnership, which is what they had in fascist Italy and Nazi Germany and all of the other national socialist states, as opposed to the international socialist state, where the government itself becomes the corporation. That's what we're dealing with right now. That's what we're dealing with going forward. We are entering into a time of major advance for fascism. And when I say fascism and Nazism, I'm not saying that Biden and these deep state establishment people are anti-Semitic, at least not in the literal sense that they're going to put Jews in concentration camps. They may not like Judaism because they don't like God, but I mean it more in that they're going to get rid of their political opponents. They're going to get rid of their political enemies, at least by having them censored, if not worse. And if anyone doesn't think that it can't get worse, I'm sorry, but you're naive. Maybe I feel this way because I'm a Jew and because I have grown up hearing about relatives and in previous generation who were murdered in the Nazi Holocaust. And because I grew up fascinated by this subject and studying it. And since then, I've written several books about it, all of which are available, by the way, at Amazon Books, not to get in a little plug. But my sensitivity on this subject is maybe a bit more acute than some, but it's there. And I do believe that it is a time of grave peril. And that what is possible now would have been unthinkable even a few months ago. And therefore, looking forward, I think it could get worse. I think it could get a lot worse. Anyway, you're welcome to join the conversation today. I mean, we have open lines. You know, I started the program on Monday and the phone lines lit up. Today, not so much. Maybe we're all just stunned and thinking about this. 617-396-4958 is the number. If you'd like to join the broadcast, you can call just using the good old-fashioned conventional phone, and you'll be on the air. We can talk about these or any issues that you care to talk about within the confines of community standards, of course. 617-396-4958. That's 617-396-4958. Now, let me get back to President Trump's amazing speech. Politicians prospered, but the jobs left and the factories closed. The establishment protected itself, but did not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they're celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. Because I'm repeating here, because what truly matters is not what truly controls our government, but whether our government is controlled by the people. January 20, 2017 will be remembered as the day the people became the rulers of this nation again. The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. Everyone is listening to you now. You come by the tens of millions to become a part of a historic movement, the likes of which the world has never seen before. At the center of this movement is a crucial conviction that a nation exists to serve its citizens. Americans want great schools for their children, safe neighborhoods for their families, and good jobs for themselves. These are just and reasonable demands of righteous people and a righteous public. But for too many of our citizens, a different reality exists. Okay, so you have President Trump noting, and this is something we should remember and think about going forward, that, quote, a nation exists to serve its citizens. Now, this is the kind of rhetoric that in the mouths of usual conventional politicians like Barack Obama or the Bushes, sounds good. We should note they always talked a pretty good game about stopping illegal immigration. But we all knew that they didn't really mean it. They were just saying it to get elected. They were saying it because it sounds good. Donald Trump meant it because, and that's why it resonated with people. And that's why his presidency has launched this unprecedented movement. Because he actually did he did understand that the purpose of government, and particularly the purpose of the American government explicitly, is to serve the people. The government is not the origin of power. The government doesn't grant you rights. Your rights come from God, the creator, as Jefferson said, or nature and nature's God, which also Jefferson said. Not from the state. Even if you're an atheist, you ought to understand that your rights as a citizen, as an individual, and the whole concept of citizenship came from the ancient Greeks, but the whole idea of your sovereign person on this planet and your ability to exercise such sovereignty in a limited capacity of being a human being, an imperfect being, over yourself to the degree we can, and over your destiny and that of your family, is a natural right. And that we establish governments to protect, preserve, and to defend those rights, not the other way around. The other way around holds that government controls rights and they give them to people out of either a sense of benevolence or they deny them out of a sense of punishment because they know better. They are the source of rights. I mean, those ideas we've always struggled, every generation has struggled with people and in power who seek to assert and usurp those rights. I think in modern times, this concept was developed by philosophers like Hegel and Kant and Marx and others. But The American system is a rejection of that and a return to the natural rights emanating from God. Donald Trump meant this when he said it. When you victims, MAGA, realize the truth, you should seek mental health. Oh, this guy's been trolling me on TikTok for a while. Yeah, maybe we should all be committed to a mental hospital. I think there are some people on the left who would do exactly that if they get power. We'll all be declared mentally insane because we don't goose step to the left, because we're not zig-heiling to the authoritarian state, and we'll all be relegated to some kind of a mental treatment. Yeah, I mean the whole science, if you will, of psychology and psychiatry is all about that, anyways. Frankly, it's about control. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't a legitimate discipline of psychology, something which used to be primarily handled by clerics. But this, the scientizing of this has been one that has always worked hand in glove with elites, both inside and outside of governments, to control people by means of manipulation of the sensors of this, the senses, by manipulating our emotions. And they also take on the intoxicating power, complete fiat power, of deciding who is mentally ill and who isn't. Anyway, getting back to my reading of President Trump's speech, I'm going to go back to that. And by the way, you're welcome to join the conversation. 617-396-4958. Come on down. Not getting a lot of calls today. I will say yesterday and Monday, the phone lines are lit up like a Christmas tree. I don't know why today people are not calling. It looks like I've got a lot of listeners. I'm looking at some of the stats, but I guess, I don't know, is this a listening program? Who knows? You're welcome to call. Please do. 617-396-4958. 617-396-4958. Let me reiterate, for the sake of identification, that the program is broadcasting live Monday through Friday from 12 noon to 1 p.m., possibly longer, depending upon guests and callers. I've committed myself to 12 noon to 1, and that I am taking calls. You will be on the air. You'll be heard. We can talk about any issues you can't talk about. And that the program, as of today, is carried by something like 7 or 8 live streams, including YouTube, Facebook, Periscope, Twitter, TikTok. I've got a bunch of other ones, DLive. And it's also archived on several sites as well. So I'm really expanding the footprint of the show, and I'm working to do that every day. Have you listened to the political parties in the past? All right, I don't know what you mean by that. Anyway, getting back to, I'm reading some TikTok comments here. Getting back to President Trump's speech. Mothers and children trapped in poverty in our inner cities. Rusted out factories, scattered like tombstones across the landscape of our nation. An education system flush with cash, but which leaves our young and beautiful students deprived of all knowledge. And the crime and the gangs and the drugs that have stolen too many lives and robbed our country of so much unrealized potential. This American carnage stops right here and stops right now. For many decades, we have enriched foreign industry at the expense of American industry, subsidized the armies of other countries while allowing for the very sad depletion of our military. Okay, now this is where President Trump gets into two things that are obvious and two things that he tried his best to address and did address, and we need to keep addressing. The first is the fact that our inner cities, our minorities, our communities of color have been damaged by and duped by the left going back to the 1960s. And that they need to wake up just like the rest of us and take on the mantle of sovereignty as citizens and demand that they have the right to freedom and the right to control their own destiny, the right to create economies, the right to preserve and advance their families. We all want the same things in this country. What has the left done to particularly the Black community in the 1960s is a scandal. It's racist in the real sense. The left is racist in this kind of Rudyard Kipling white man's burden type of racism. They think they talk to Black people like they're children. They think they're smarter than them. Oh, we're going to take care of you. And what have they done? Well, in 1965, Lyndon Johnson's Undersecretary of Labor at the time, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a sociologist and who would go on to become a senator from New York, he issued a report where he expressed concern that the implementation of such programs as the war on poverty and the national welfare infrastructure would damage and hurt Black communities and Black families. And we should note that at that time, the Black family was very intact. I mean, it was something like 80% of African Americans were married and had children. And in fact, marriage in the Black community, there's another sociologist who did some research on this. I don't remember his name. He's a Black sociologist. He found that after the Civil War, the Black family and the Black condition of marriage was much stronger than white people because they wanted to react to the horrors of slavery, where families were separated and sold into other families. I mean, this terrible genocidal agenda that had existed before the Civil War, they wanted to counteract that by strengthening their families. And that D.P. Moynihan was concerned that the implementation of national welfare plans to help people below the poverty line would divide families and hurt the Black community. And he advocated that such programs be conducted locally with maybe some government support or partnership with local government so that individuals could be responded to as such and their individual needs could be addressed based upon their unique conditions and in such a way that would advance their ability to remain involved in society in a meaningful way and be productive instead of this cookie cutter nationalizing of that system, which is what happened. And it destroyed or seriously damaged the Black family. It gave incentive to women to not get married and to have the man leave the house and then to have children out of wedlock. So you had children, particularly young men, growing up without fathers. This was very bad socially. I don't think anyone denies that. You had the left attacking the Black church, starting with Margaret Sanger and her Negro Project in the late 30s, where she tried to get abortion clinics into Black neighborhoods by bribing local ministers. She knew that as a white person, they wouldn't listen to her, so she got ministers involved and she corrupted the church in the process. You have anti-business attitudes, which prevented Black entrepreneurialism with high taxes and regulations. You had, as I said, the damage to the Black family by these welfare programs and other programs of like nature. And the result was inevitable. You had unemployed Black men, and that led to more violence. And the final arbiter, plus you had the introduction of the drug trade. I don't know if I want to get into this too much, but there was a reporter from the San Jose Mercury, I think it was. I interviewed him years ago. He committed suicide, apparently, who wrote about how the government and the CIA, he claimed, had brought drugs into the inner city for profit and for control. In the 1960s, you had the MK Ultra movement, where you had psychologists like Jolion West, and you had people like Albert from Ram Dass from Harvard and Timothy Leary, all CIA, introducing and glamorizing the use of drugs. All these things were meant to control people. All these things hurt, particularly minority communities. And so the result is socially that, and by the way, in spite of all of this, Black people and people of color have risen up in terms of becoming middle class and becoming successful and overcoming these anti-business, anti-American programs to become successes. But yet it has kept some people locked into poverty. Not to mention the other spoke on the wheel is public education, which turned our education system from one based upon cognitive learning, teaching young people to think independently, learning how to read with phonics, learning how to think, independently and become sovereign as citizens, to one based on behaviorism, one based upon a politicization of education, one based on look-say reading, which scrambled young people's brains. And minority students were particularly vulnerable to this because their families had already been compromised by the big state welfare programs. The drugs had already been introduced into their neighborhoods. The anti-business attitudes had already hurt their ability to create business. And the compromise of the Black church had led to a diminution of spiritual and moral alternatives. And so they were more hurt by these massive public schools than white people. And by the way, it was the Trump administration that advocated, choice in terms of going to charter schools. It was Betsy DeVos who was involved with that. And that was opposed by the left and the big fat teachers unions, particularly the National Education Association, which wants to keep young Black students locked into these inner city schools where they can be treated like psychological guinea pigs for their behavioral experiments. Talk about racist. And so finally, socially, the last line of defense, the last people left who can actually help address the problems that the left had predominantly created were the local police. They're not perfect. You have some bad apples. But for the most part, these were men and women, and by the way, a large percentage of them were people of color, who go out every day, put on a uniform, risk their lives trying to keep these neighborhoods safe so that the 99% of people who still are trying to get to work, or the children who are trying to play in their front yards, can function. And so what does the left do? They come for them. They come for the last structure that protects those citizens and allows people to begin to break out and get ahead. They come for them by defunding them, by allowing these gangs, these radical leftist shock troops, to roam these neighborhoods, looting Black businesses, burning Black neighborhoods, murdering Black people, including children in Chicago. That's what they do. Anyway, getting back to President Trump's speech. And by the way, you're welcome to join the broadcast. What is on your mind this afternoon? 617-396-4958 is the number. 617-396-4958. Let's see. So the first part of these comments were talking about how President Trump wanted to restore these compromised communities and these neighborhoods, which had been run by corrupt Democrat machines for decades. These same corrupt machines, which, by the way, cheated Trump out of the election. in places like Philadelphia and Detroit. He wanted to try to help people recognize this and realize it and thus overcome it and begin to come out of it by operating in their own interest. And I think he made progress in that way. I think he woke up a lot of people, particularly people of color. Here in Massachusetts, for example, where I live, Trump did better in Boston. He did better in communities like Lawrence and Fall River and Holyoke, which have predominant Hispanic populations. He did better among, I think, Asians, and he did better even among my fellow Jews, believe it or not. I mean, I would never have thought that. And so I think that that's a trend that is not going to be stopped. I think that's going to continue. I think that's going to continue to grow. Then he goes on to talk a little bit about foreign policy. And this is something that I think is a huge success for President Trump, because he put America first in the world stage. And by doing so, he inspired other nations to put their nations first in their dealings with the rest of the world, as it should be. He reasserted an old-fashioned idea, one that actually does, again, go back to the, I suppose, the ancient Greeks and the ancient Hebrews, and one that is obviously a part of nature, one that obviously even the animal kingdom understands, and that is the right to sovereignty, national sovereignty, the development of the nation state as a progressive idea, as an entity that protects democratic rights. He reasserted that. That's one of the big reasons why the left despise Trump also, because they're into this mentally ill, demented idea that somehow national sovereignty and borders are superstitions and anachronisms that should be done away with in exchange for a world order where we become one big international ant colony. That's what they believe, this bizarre communist idea. Trump rejected that. Other presidents in the past have talked about this. They've talked about securing our borders. They've talked about America's place in the world. But everybody knows they didn't mean it. There's just a lot of flowery rhetoric, a lot of double talk, a lot of code. Well, Donald Trump meant it. He put America first. He believed in making his own nation great, just like he wanted to make his individual family great, just like he wanted to make his own life great. That's natural. That's what we are. That's wired into who we are as human beings. You want to put yourself first before your neighbor. You want to put your family first before your neighbor's family. You want to put your community first before other communities. And you want to put your nation first before other nations. This is normal. This is natural. Animals understand this. Plants understand this. This is existence. This is what God gave us to understand our identities and how they are separate from the identities of others. Then we can all live together in reasonable harmony with conflicts. Then we can all help each other, but only when we understand who we are first and we put our own interests first. When you as an individual put your interests first, it's only then that you're in a position where you can help your neighbor. Same thing with nations. If our nation puts its interests first and the rights of its sovereign citizens first, then it can help other nations. The answer for the left is to create, to sacrifice that and to turn us into a kind of an ant colony or a sort of a appendage, a province of the world. Trump rejected that. And that's one of the reasons also why the left despises Trump. And it's something that's normal and natural, as I said. He did this. He put America first in the world. He improved our military, which creates peace. And at the same time, he withdrew our entanglements with other nations. As George Washington so greatly said, in his farewell address. You know, he de-escalated foreign wars. Wasn't that used to be a cause of the left, to de-escalate? I seem to recall Marvin Gaye. Remember the song? I don't know. We all want to de-escalate, right? Isn't that something the left used to support? Stopping these perpetual wars that we've been engaged in since World War One. Donald Trump meant this, and he did it. He defeated ISIS with very few casualties, if any. He just dropped a big fat bomb on them. You know, he occasionally would throw a bomb here and there, but he de-escalated that war. He withdrew American troops from the ongoing imbroglio in Afghanistan, the swamp. He withdrew American troops from Iraq. He did not engage in a war in Syria. He forced the NATO allies to pay for their own defense to the tune of billions of dollars, and began the process of withdrawing American personnel from a theater that was won in World War II, and at the same time supporting our allies. He encouraged peace with North Korea. I know it didn't quite work out the way we all wanted to work out. Nothing is perfect, but we should note that since Trump has been in office, at least after the first 6 months, North Korea is no longer throwing missiles over the South China, over the Sea of Japan. They're no longer testing nuclear devices. They've generally been more peaceful. He defended our allies. Hello, you're on the air. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Charles, it's Phoebe. How are you?
I'm good, Phoebe. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Charles, you were talking about how President Trump was trying to de-escalate the wars that were going on.
Yes, yes, I was.
Mm-hmm. 4 years ago, when he was running, I always felt that the Republicans, especially the Republicans, because I perceive the Republicans as the war party. I know the Democrats are too.
Right.
The Republicans are the biggest warmongers. And it's for that reason, I believe, it's my opinion, that it's for that reason that they stabbed President Trump in the back to the very end, because of his strong stance against the wars.
Oh, I think that's one of the big reasons. I don't think there's any question. I mean, the neocons who got us involved in the Iraq War and the Afghanistan War, yeah, they you know, now they're coming back too. I mean, you've got this guy who I think Biden has nominated for Secretary of State, this guy Blinken. He gave a speech a few months back where he said we should get involved in a war with Syria. We want to send troops. So we're going back to that. We're going to go back to the policy, as the historian Charles Austin Beard called it, perpetual war for perpetual peace. That's been the policy of American foreign policy since World War One, and we're going back to it, and it's horrible. It's a, you know, Donald Trump was a peace president. We had no wars during his 4 years. We, you know, he would occasionally drop a strategic bomb here and there, but there was no expansion of war. There was a de-escalation of war, and there was a more peaceful world, I may add, as a result of it.
I agree, and I believe it's precisely for that reason. I think this issue of war, I believe, is ultimately the heart of the matter as to why this satanic, and I'm not saying this just to say this, but I honestly believe with all my heart this government is loaded with Satanists that want to get rid of him because of his anti-war stance.
I agree with you entirely. I mean, I don't know if they're literal Satanists and that they are practicing satanic ritual like whoever's behind the QAnon says. I don't know that, but I don't doubt it. They are effectively they're Satanists.
I've never put any trust or any of my head into QAnon, because I'm starting to wonder if the QAnon thing was anti-Trump.
You know, look, I don't trust it because I need to know I need to see somebody sign something. I mean, you have to be able to hear a person step up and say who they are. Otherwise, I don't trust anything, whether I agree with it or not. You know, I mean, it reminds me back in the day when I used to have a show, and I'd get people coming on with me talking about space aliens
Uh-huh.
and flying saucers. And I had this one guy really insist that he sees a spaceship in Colorado and that he described it. And I said, look, send me a round trip ticket. I'll fly out there, meet me at the airport, take me to the site, and I'll look at it. And if you show me, then I'll talk about it. Otherwise, forget it. And of course, he couldn't do that.
But because the thing is, like, for 4 years, like, this whole QAnon thing was saying, oh, Trump is going to do this and he's going to arrest this person, he's going to do this and that and that and that. And it kind of like you wonder if it was a psychological operation to create this cult-like following.
I have no idea.
Backfiring
I've tried to find out. I've asked some people, even on this program, who I would assume would know about this, and none of them really want to comment on it. I think I asked Dr. Jerome Corsi about it. He had no comment. He doesn't know. So, I wouldn't trust it. I take a jaundiced eye. I have no problem with the idea of investigating pedophilia and satanic practices. But and I agree with them on that. But other than that, I don't trust them.
They're starting to use one of the things that they're holding against Trump right now is QAnon. And so I'm wondering if QAnon was created for the purposes of ultimately leading to it being used against him. You see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying, and I actually wouldn't doubt it. And by the way, in that vein, I want to mention, excuse me, I was listening to Alex Jones the other day, and he is telling people, because there's going to be this kind of protest movement in Washington, D.C. on Inauguration Day, he's suggesting, and I join him, that we don't go, that we stay home, because he feels that this is a deep state operation. It's a false flag. We're already in a position right now because of the so-called breach of the Capitol, which, by the way, was peaceful. No property was damaged, a couple of broken windows. It was not violent. It was wrong, and the people should be arrested because they were trespassing.
There was a woman killed.
She was killed by police, and wrongfully. But the point is that this is being used now like the Reichstag fire was used in Nazi Germany. It's being used as an excuse to suspend civil liberties. There are people who want to, and round people up as so-called insurrectionists. They're using words like terrorist. And I think that, it makes me think that this might have been a false flag, that it was set up that way. But even whether it was or not, and I have no idea, I think it probably wasn't actually. I think it was just some couple of over-rambunctious protesters who decided to go into the Capitol. But either way, it's being used like that. And this thing happening on Inauguration Day, you could have people threading the crowd, let's say, who might be Antifa people, whoever, who might do some things that are violent. And that'll be used even more so by those who want to, take away our rights and lock us up, maybe. I don't know. Anyway,
they want to take, like, they're freezing, certain banks are freezing Trump's assets, and like millions of dollars are being, like, what are you guys gonna do? Like, the guys like you who are out there speaking, what are you gonna do when they start doing this stuff to you? Because I'm starting to get
I don't
scared.
know. I'm doing the best I can. I would not be at all surprised if I find out tomorrow morning when I turn on my YouTube to find that the whole thing's been wiped out. I mean, it's happening to people I know, and they're freezing bank accounts. They're trying to stop. That's been going on for a while. I mean, they did that to Gab. They shut off PayPal shut off their ability to take subscriptions. I mean, this is a war. I mean, this is an all-out. And look, as I said earlier, this is the literal definition of fascism. Fascism is not outright government ownership of everything, which is communism, when the government itself becomes the corporation. Fascism is when government works hand in glove with a select group of corporations in partnership to control a country and to control everything in it. That's where we're heading. That's why I say that we're looking at a Nazi or fascist-like development here. You have, the big social media basically deciding to purge President Trump himself from having a voice. They've removed Parler, which was a big group. I mean, it's a billion-dollar company. They just simply have them wiped out. I mean, that's destroying the voice of major people. There were people on Parler who had, hundreds of thousands of followers. They're now not going to be able to communicate with them anymore. It's over. It's complete censorship. And they're doing it in partnership. They've got Twitter, and apparently there was collusion between Twitter, Google, and Apple. And as this new administration comes in, do you think they're going to do anything about that? They're going to, I mean, I'm not saying they're going to sit down with them and form, like Mussolini did, a council of corporations, although they are apparently bringing some of these people into the government. But what they're doing is by doing nothing or by turning a blind eye, they are, in the de facto sense, working within a fascist system. Anyways, Phoebe, I'm afraid I might have already said too much. I'm getting nervous even talking about this, and that's troubling right there. Anyway, thanks a lot, Phoebe. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Okay, and you're welcome to join me in the final segment here. Looks like it's already after 1 o'clock. Having such a great time, 617-396-4958. What is on your mind this afternoon? 617-396-4958. I think that what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to be coming back at 2 p.m. with a guest, that being Michael Shaw, who's a regular on my program, and who does like we do political talk. He's going to be coming on with me, I believe, at 2 o'clock. So I think I'm going to take a break. And you're welcome to join me at that time. It's now a little after the top of the hour. It's about 15 after the hour. You're welcome to join me at that time. I'd appreciate it. You're welcome to come on down, and we can talk then. In the meantime, I want to thank, it looks like we get another call. Maybe I'll take that. All right. Hello, you're on the air.
Hi, Charles.
Hi.
It's Catherine on the line.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi, I enjoy your show and your TikTok commentary.
Thank you.
My question is, do you think that Trump has a path to victory with just 1 week left?
You never know what might happen between now and next Wednesday. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think that he hasn't conceded, but at the same time, I don't see it. I think that maybe this is why they're pushing an impeachment right now, not just to make sure that that doesn't happen, but maybe to try to make sure that he doesn't run again in 4 years. That's been said. So, but no, I don't think so. I think not at this point. We've got Michael Shaw here. Mike, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, I didn't think I'd be able to make it, but here I am.
Here you are.
Because you're so important,
Well, I mean, Michael Shaw is my guest every Wednesday, usually at 2. Today he's here at 1. Michael, I am doing the program live with phone calls.
That's great.
Yeah, and I'm also being carried live by something like 10 platforms, including besides YouTube and TikTok, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, DLive, Twitch. I mean, Podomatic. It's growing every day, and it's amazing. There's a lot you can do in this wonderful world of media.
That's great. And,
until they pull the plug, if you know what I mean.
That's right. I was going to say, nobody say anything. Say the secret words.
Well, that's just it. We're in an atmosphere right now where you don't know quite, how to proceed. I mean, I just said some things even just now that are worrying me. I mean, I feel like, I mean, because it's all arbitrary. I feel like I would not at all be surprised if I wake up tomorrow morning and look at my account and find out it's been.
And the Stasi comes in and knocks on your door.
All right, we have a caller. Hello, you're on the air. Thanks for calling.
Hey, Charles. Hey. I was just going to call and comment on the legitimacy issue.
Okay.
And I'm saying that if he was not elected through a legal process, it's not for you and I to just choose for him to be the president. If he's clearly not the president, then we don't have that choice. It's like an unalienable thing where I don't get to say Kamala Harris is the president. I don't get to say anybody is the president if they're not duly elected in a fair and transparent manner. So I think I'm taking the argument out of everybody's hands. You don't have to vote in on that. If he's not the president, it doesn't mean he doesn't have the power. It doesn't mean that you don't have to, obey laws. It's not about that. It's just he's just not the president. Now, had they examined evidence openly and concluded that, hey, there was no fraud, fine. If they concluded that there was fraud and then they redid the election and it turns out that he won, now he's the president. But you see my point? It's like an
Yes.
unalienable right. I don't get to tell you, oh, you have the right to fall in love. And you don't get to tell me that I can't fall in love. These are just unalienable things. So the system is set up for him to be the president or not the president. And the way we have it set up now, he cannot possibly be the president.
Well, let me
Does that make sense?
let me comment, and then Mike, you can comment.
Right.
I mean, my comment on that is that whoever is inaugurated a week from today is going to be the president, whether it be Trump or Biden, whether or not he got there legitimately or otherwise. I don't like the fact that the evidence has not been heard. I think the evidence has been shut down by the media, by the court system, state and federal, and by the Congress when they stopped the debate because of the incursion. And so we don't know in a formal sense whether it was stolen, and we're not gonna know. However, having said that, I think the option continues to exist moving forward of having this investigated, continuing to ask people like Sidney Powell and Rudolph Giuliani and others and state officials and state legislators to bring these cases and to try to get this adjudicated. And if in fact it does turn out that it was fraudulent, then there can be an impeachment. But short of that, I recognize the president, regardless of who is sworn in, because that's the president. I don't want to be like the left was with Trump, where they were saying, oh, he's not our president, when no one disputed the fact that he was and he was elected. Even with the stealing, I still want to see consistency in government, and I still will recognize the president of the United States, even if it's Biden. Mike?
Well,
I don't see what. Okay, go ahead.
Well, go ahead, Mike.
okay, I don't see any alternative to that. Indeed, it's being pressed by the other side. There was a little debate by Jim Jordan the other day about the chairman of that committee, whoever his name is, wanted Jordan to say that there was no voter fraud, which Jordan didn't do. He said, look, I recognize that Biden is the president-elect, and that, but it doesn't necessarily follow that I also have to accept there was no fraud.
Yeah, that's sort of my position.
Well, I would put it more like if I pull you over and I give you a speeding ticket, and you say, "Hey, what's your badge number?" and I say, "Well, it's 27," and you go, "Well, why aren't you wearing a uniform?" I said, "Well, because it's getting dry cleaned." And now you have some doubts as to whether or not I'm a police officer. At that stage, it doesn't matter if you acknowledge me as a police officer. I'm in fact not a police officer. And you can pay me the fine, you can accept the ticket, you can go down to court, you can do anything you want to do, but the fact still remains, I'm not a police officer. You just acknowledged somebody that did not have, by right, the title that you're granting him. So where am I wrong on this?
Well, no, it's because it's a failed analogy. I mean, if someone is impersonating a police officer, that isn't exactly the same as us alleging that there were irregularities with this election.
There's no irregularity. It's in context, which means that it has not been determined with certainty that he is the president. There's legitimate statistical analysis. There's constitutional reasons to believe that this thing was not held honorably. In the same sense, that just because I put on a uniform, it doesn't make me a police officer. There's an actual process by which the state can grant me the authority.
Well, here's the problem.
We have not granted, the system grants him the authority. The election grants him the authority.
Yes.
Not anything else. So
well, that's the system. And there are only certain means available to fight it. And more's the pity that the deck has been stacked against our side in any way to fight it. I mean, the most ridiculous thing was that had people known history, they would have realized that Thomas Jefferson, when he was vice president, quite participated in the election of 1800. And in fact, that went to the House of Representatives. And oh, by the way, he was a candidate for president and he won. So he had a tremendous conflict of interest, but somehow that's what happened. So I think the problem was that Pence should have at least said something positive, which he didn't. The rumor around, and I kind of plugged in a little bit to the DC rumor mill being based out here. There are people saying that Pence was a never Trumper from the jump and was just happy to take that job. I mean, who knows? So we're just going to have to see how it plays out.
Monty Python skit where the guy's asking King Arthur, it's like, hey, so how did you become king? And he goes off on this lofty explanation of the Lady of the Lake coming out of the lake and handing him the sword and making him king. Well, if that's the legitimate process by which a king is created, well, then he is king, no matter how ridiculous the process. But our process simply requires that you have to have a fair and honest and open election, and it has to be agreed upon. Once it's not, it's not even up for you and I to decide. We have no president. We have a guy up there right now that's claiming he's president. What would be the difference if during the debate, Joe Biden ran over to Donald Trump, tied him up with a rope, gagged him, and threw him on a ship, and then the ship sank? Can he say, hey, I'm president because the other guy's gone?
Well, here's the problem.
No, he's not the president.
The problem with this theoretical argument is that everything in real life is a function of time with hard deadlines. It turns out that the first time that Lyndon Johnson took office, it was a highly disputed election, but they ran out of time and he became the congressman, even though it was pretty clear that there was fraud involved. But he just ran out of time and there was a hard deadline, and that was that. Just like in a football game, there's a hard deadline. Okay. So what you're saying is interesting and fun, and you may not recognize him as the president, and I probably am not going to be happy about it either. But
he is.
But who cares? I mean,
it's not my opinion. It doesn't matter whether I recognize
and also,
him or not.
let me just
go through the process.
Well, no, actually, technically, he did go through the process, even if the process was corrupt. And that is that these state governors, contradicting the rights of their state legislatures, appointed delegates for Biden, and those delegates voted for Biden. Even though, I mean, one of the things we can learn from this is that state legislators in the future have to take their constitutional prerogative of appointing delegates. The other thing is that we never got a hearing in the U.S. House because of the incursion of people into the Capitol. I mean, the whole thing was canceled. And then in the wee hours of midnight, they gavelled through Biden. The whole thing is the most corrupt election in history. But
if it's corrupt, Charles, and you're admitting it's corrupt, then
I am admitting that.
President.
No,
then he's not the president, because you cannot have a corruptively elected president. Like I said, if Biden just shot Donald Trump at during the debates and said, "Hey, I'm president," would you accept that he's the president?
I would accept that Pence would be the president. Look, we have a system here.
Okay.
Would you accept that? Let me ask you this. Let me turn the tables a little bit here. Sure. Would you accept that Barack Obama was president, even though it's no question that he was not born on American soil?
Yes, I'd accept that.
All right, fine.
Here's
That's
why.
not constitutional. And I
Yeah,
do
I know
accept it
it
as
is.
well,
I
by the
know it
way.
is,
And
but-
once he was elected, I accepted him as president of the United States. He got away with that. Fine. He was elected and he was president. And that's,
Well,
you know,
here's the
this is
difference.
worse than that.
I believe he got the
would add.
majority vote despite that information. I believe that the majority of the people who voted for Obama, I believe that they wanted him to be president.
Yeah, but you could say that it was not constitutional because the Constitution says that the president has to be born on American soil.
Yeah, that's a
And in
very
fact,
good
that's
person.
that's what
that's a good
people over at
example. I'm
WorldNet
chill
Daily
about that,
said.
yeah.
There were people, and I never liked that argument, but they were saying he's not legitimate because of that, and they could make that argument, but I reject that.
Well, now we're back to your system. Didn't the system determine that actually he was born in Hawaii?
No.
Well, no, that it was never determined. And I don't want to go back into re-debating that. That whole thing was brought up by Hillary Clinton, by the way.
Yeah.
And even
Okay, so we agree
you
it's
know.
questionable. And I'm just saying that, I mean, if he didn't, just like the football game, if they didn't score that final touchdown or if that field goal never went through, then you can't say that they won.
Well, no, but
You know,
that's
whatever
where,
happened,
sir, that's where you're
You know,
wrong.
they didn't win.
Because the definition of who won the game is what's recorded at the end of the game, even though you may not have liked this or that penalty call. So
There you go.
Yeah. I see your point. I'm saying that why wouldn't shooting Trump during the debate make and he shoots Pence too. That just kills everybody.
Well, then
You're saying that
Nancy
regardless
Pelosi.
of how, he's the only guy standing.
Then
Now
we have
he's
no.
the
Then we have
president.
Nancy Pelosi as president. Anyway, listen. Thanks a lot for the
All
call.
right, thank you, Charles.
All right.
Appreciate you, sir.
Thank you. All right, Mike. Let me just give out the number because this is a live program now. You're welcome to call in 617-396-4958. 617-396-4958. Michael D. Shaw is my guest. So, Mike, you know, here we are 1 week away, and they're trying to impeach Trump.
well, yeah, they're piling on, and I think this is, whether it's successful or not, I think this is a forerunner of what to expect. And the good news is that they're overplaying their hand because they're going to try all these ridiculous things because they think
It's insane, but you know, it's scary because you have, I mean, I was talking about this earlier. You've got them removing President Trump from Twitter, which is something that is, you know, unprecedented. Even Angela Merkel from Germany has criticized this, saying it's deeply problematic. And you have them taking down Parler, which was a competitor for Twitter, and which was a legitimate site. It was $1 billion site. And as a result, you've got people on the conservative side who had hundreds of thousands of followers who are now not going to be heard. You've got, I mean, I could just mention in my own case, I'm looking at my TikTok account and I'm seeing people who follow me and people who I follow. I look through the list and I see every day that they're being removed on both sides. So, you know, you've got this power drunk, fascistic group who can see that they got away with the lockdowns. They got away with burning and looting Black neighborhoods and in the name of helping Black people. They got away with stealing an election. And now they're taking the next step. And I can tell you that you know, yes, they're overplaying the hand, but at the same time, maybe it's because I'm a Jew who has sensitivity about the Holocaust and who grew up hearing about relatives who were murdered in the Nazi Holocaust, that I am concerned about the rise of a fascistic system.
Well, no question about it. That's how it started.
Yeah,
They didn't wake up one day and decide to round up the Jews.
right.
They started off with
They started off with the Reichstag fire, by
Yeah.
the way, which I do compare to the incursion in the Capitol. You know, the Reichstag fire happened about 2 or 3 weeks after Hitler was elected. And it was blamed on a young communist guy, but nobody knows what actually happened. There's always been rumors that it was, set by them. But
I think
either
it
way,
was.
yeah, but it was used as an excuse for the Nazis to suspend the Constitution, and that started the ball rolling toward World War II. I mean, and the Holocaust. And I think that this Capitol fire, the Capitol incursion, which by the way was peaceful, it was wrong, and the people were trespassing, and they should be arrested. But they weren't looting the building. It wasn't
No.
like last summer with the looting of the black businesses. Um, Nevertheless, it's being used, and now they're throwing around words like insurrection and terrorism, and
Well, they're taking every advantage of this latter-day Reichstag fire, and it's a very good comparison, by the way. And people should be scared by how this thing has escalated. I think it probably started off with the media outrageously against Trump from the very beginning. Then, of course, COVID came along, and with all these stupid lockdowns. And now it is funny that Governor Cuomo is sort of hinting at, well, just kidding. Maybe we're going to open everything up now. Totally destructive. Even the sad part is, even with this vaccine, people are wondering, somehow there's been big problems with getting that out to the right people. Was it the governor of New Jersey that decided the top priority group was inmates? So,
by the way, I want to ask you a question about that, Mike, because you have a lot of information on
Right.
medical issues, and we've talked about the virus. My understanding is that people are saying that even after you've got the vaccine and you've had, allegedly had, immunity, you're still supposed to wear the mask. You still can't go out.
well,
I mean, are you contagious? I mean, if you have immunity, can you still carry it and give it to other people?
well, see, what they're doing is conflating a bunch of stuff that's probably not proven. Remember when they said at the beginning that even though you're asymptomatic, you can still infect people? Well, they've kind of backed off from that quite a bit. All right. And they never did the obvious documentation. I mean, think about it. You got $1 trillion that the government gave you, some ridiculous around billions of dollars to do this vaccine. What's the easiest possible test you can do? Well, why don't we monitor these people and see if they still are testing positive, or see if they're still contagious? They never did it. Okay. Plus, there are people getting side effects that are not being promoted very much. And I know I've heard numbers like half the healthcare workers don't want to take this vaccine. Now, that's being countered by the argument, well, yeah, but that's all those lowly entry level types. But no, it isn't. Because my wife, in speaking to a nurse practitioner, she went to the doctor and just asked her flat out, are you getting, he was a young woman, maybe in her 30s, are you getting this? Well, we're forced to, but otherwise I wouldn't do it. So there are people that are questioning this.
So there's some resistance to it.
And there are people questioning it who are not lunatics. I have a very good friend who's a retired allergy immunology guy from LA. He had a big practice. And I asked him, and he said he's not really sure. He doesn't like the idea of the messenger RNA. And let's say he's not rushing out to get it. He finally, when I pressed him, he said, look, if you really feel you're at risk and you do the risk benefit comparison, is it better ultimately to get this thing? But I'm not young, okay, and I'm not in a big rush.
Nor am I, but yet I know some people already who have had it, and I've talked to them. I guess that I wonder, and I'm not going to express an opinion about it. I mean, it's a personal question, but I wonder how long is it going to take, do you think, Mike, before we do see any negative aspects of it possibly become manifested?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the trouble is that the entire media is untrustworthy. I mean, compare it to this. Why is it suddenly an article of faith that Trump incited the mob?
Right, exactly. This is a big lie, and this is what they do.
But I mean, that's become the official version.
Yeah, it's become gospel now. It's
Okay,
like
so
it's like the
let's,
Charlottesville hoax. You
Yeah.
know, it's accepted as truths because it's said enough times. This is the time we live in. It's the big
well, that's another analogy to the Nazis, by the way.
right, exactly.
So let's assume that there might be some side effects. There was the celebrated case 2 weeks ago of a nurse in Portugal getting the shot, having nothing more than a sore arm, and then but she had a very bad side effect 2 days later. She dropped dead.
Mhm.
All right, is that related? Who knows? But at this point, I don't even know if the media is 100% behind the
I
vaccine.
mean, even I know I get we can't trust how this is reported. We now know how corrupt the media is. I mean, we can see how corrupt they are from the election.
Well, the problem is we also know how corrupt the healthcare establishment is.
That's true
Uh,
too. And yes, as you say, there's a lot of money at stake. I think a lot of people are making huge amounts of money from the vaccine. We know that there's a certain drug we can't mention, Mike. You know which one I'm talking about.
There's two drugs.
Yeah, but one of them begins with the letter H. You
The
know,
other begins with I. Yeah.
we can't mention them because I'll be taken off the air. In
Yeah.
fact, Tom Fitton, the head of Judicial Watch, which has been around for a long time, it's a law firm. They've had, freedom of information. I understand he just lost his YouTube channel because he did a show months ago where he talked about this particular drug and how an article had been written from Lancet magazine and the New England Journal of Medicine condemning it, and that they had to pull that article because it was false.
Right.
His show was removed for that. I mean, he's being censored, and he didn't even do it recently. I know I've talked about it, quite frankly. I'm nervous. I'm actually thinking about going back into my archives and deleting some things. I mean, not that, I'm sure if they want to take me away, they will anyway. But I'm just saying I'm making the point here that there are certain subjects which we can't talk about.
Well,
And
did you ever
with regards to the
think
virus, people are making a lot of money from the vaccine.
did you ever think that in the United States you'd have to worry about Stasi knocking on your door at 3 a.m.?
No, and I am worried about it. I mean, I don't know if it's going to get that bad, but I've invested a lot of my time in doing this program. I'm determined to do it now every day at 12 noon live. And I just, you wonder in the back of your mind, what am I going to say, today? You worry. I mean, there are a bunch of things I've already said today that I'm going to be like, after, once I'm finished up, I'll be scratching my head thinking like, oh boy, I wish I hadn't said,
Yeah, of
this
course.
and that, because you don't know what,
But you
might
can't
have
really
crossed
live
the
that
line.
way because you end up with this completely expurgated show.
Exactly. And I think that having said that, I mean, I do believe that I try to operate within reasonable bounds of community standards. I do censor myself to a certain extent, like I would if I worked for a radio station, and I have worked for radio stations. But even in that context, I don't know what toe I might step on. You don't know, I mean, where the axe is going to fall, and you won't see the hand that drops the axe either.
No.
So anyway,
I guess
I wish we could talk about something more cheerful, but that's
well,
what we are. Yeah.
if they can remove Trump's account, which by the way, Gab had backed up. They backed up Trump's entire account and put it on Gab.
Good. Yeah, I mean, Gab, by the way, I mean, they were able to survive after they were deplatformed, after they had PayPal shut off their bank.
They got their own servers.
Yeah, they got their own servers, which is not easy and which is expensive. But I think that's how you have to go. I mean, that's what Alex Jones did.
Yeah.
He was the first one to go. And he, look, I think that, by the way, Jones did the wrong thing by talking about the shooters at Sandy Hook. And he should have been sued for that and was. But that doesn't mean that he should be removed. You have a system where somebody who does wrong can pay a consequence, and then you move on. You don't, to me, it was used as an excuse to have him completely expunged.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, from the public. And he seems to have survived it by setting up his own server. I'm not in a position to do that, to be honest with you.
Well, okay, what they're trying to do is to prevent our side from coming out with with anything positive. In other words, if we start talking about how we should educate the younger generation and so on, that's really getting pretty close to them regarding us as insurrectionists against their side.
Oh, it's just propaganda. These are just lies. And they have the nerve to talk about insurrection when they did nothing but support since last summer all of these shock troops, these left-wing gangs burning and looting black neighborhoods.
Right.
You know, and you have on the record, I mean, Kamala Harris coming out in support of that. You've got my own Congresswoman, Ayanna Pressley, here in Boston. Oh, these riots are for civil rights. I mean, this is a great idea. While you see them burning up, shooting black children. I mean, it's, so I mean, it's disgusting, and it's just despicable that they're going to talk about insurrection.
Well, the thing that I found amusing in all this was that if you go to websites that are, quote, debunking the voter fraud, it's very curious and very funny. The famous Fulton County video is debunked by saying, well, here's what actually happened. They thought they were going to close up for the night. Hold that thought, please. They thought they were going to close up for the night, and people started leaving, and then they decided, well, we're not going to close up for the night. And we, of course, in closing up, we put the ballots under the table. But now that we reopen, okay, but that was the operating debunking. Okay, obviously, a couple of questions arise. One, who the hell stops counting during a presidential election? All right. And the way they dismiss this fake water main, well, actually it wasn't. It was a urinal that was leaking.
Which turned out to be untrue, by the way. I mean, there was no water main break. And
no, there was no water main break. And a urinal linking isn't exactly the same. So what I'm saying is, it was, as we used to say back in the music industry, when something was BS, or someone giving a rat-a-tat-tat type explanation. There's a bunch of words. It doesn't mean anything, but that's the official explanation. And every single debunking was like that. Or they would interview the Secretary of State of Georgia. Did you do so-and-so and so? No, I didn't do so-and-so and so. That's it.
Well, they just flat out lie. I mean, in a sense, I have to say that Joe Biden himself is a very accomplished and very experienced liar. And I'd point out, for example, that his strategy, whenever asked about the involvement of him and his son, Hunter, and his family in making these foreign deals while he was vice president and going back to his career as senator, and he just would lie. No, never happened. That's absolutely false.
Well,
and
you see, the brilliant thing about that strategy, think about it. If you walk in, if you own a store, and you walk in and someone, your employee, is emptying out the cash register and putting it in his pocket, and you confront him with that, oh, no, I'm not emptying out the cash register and putting it in my pocket. You must be mistaken. So it's such an outrageous lie that you don't even know how to respond.
Exactly, and he'd do it with such certainty and such a deadpan quality.
Yeah.
Oh no, this is a lie.
Well, he's been doing it all his life.
He has, and the thing is that obviously the media let him do it because they went out. They talk about lies. I mean, they went out with this whole concocted propaganda piece saying that, oh, this is a piece of Russian misinformation. That particularly boils my blood about the whole thing is not even the fact that after the fact it comes out that it was true, but that Bill Barr sat on this for almost a year.
He's another one. He was a
oh my God
guy from the beginning.
Hello, you're on the air. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Charles. Paul, how you doing?
Good, Paul.
I wanted to ask you two gentlemen a great question about the transfer of wealth that no one is mentioning that's going on right now. When you watch Steve Bannon at the Oxford Union, and he sort of talks about why Trump was elected and the $20 trillion of transfer of wealth in 2008 with the Wall Street crash, He says that's pretty much the number one reason why Americans, between that, the Patriot Act, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and these large multinationals making hidden deals with senators to only go in and look at a document for an hour, and also, of course, 9/11, how that was handled. Americans wanted to change, and Trump came in and seemed to be doing the right thing, and the left definitely went after him in different ways. But what concerns me is since this coronavirus has come, instead of the economy or the globe coming together and freezing it, freezing the competition, freezing the markets, printing money, handling it almost like an alien invasion, getting through the world together, and then once it's over, starting up the economy again and letting competition happen. Instead, all I see is the largest transfer of wealth, at least according to James Rickards, who's the currency war expert for the Pentagon, in human history. I mean, it's going to be between $20 and $40 trillion in the next couple of years, and $200 trillion globally, as these multinationals, these revolutionary multinationals, one thing that William F. Buckley and Chomsky could actually agree on, probably for different reasons, are buying up everything. And Trump isn't saying a word about it. And sometimes,
I think he's talking about it. I think he's trying his best.
The largest transfer of wealth in human history.
No, I think Paul, he is trying to combat it. I mean, it's a huge thing. It's very similar to what happened during the Great Depression, when you had suddenly the stock market collapse and all of these oligarchs who had put their assets into gold and had put their assets into objets d'art and other tangibles and property. They stepped in and they bought up all these small businesses at a bargain. The same thing's happening now. You have small businesses are the ones who are suffering the most. Restaurants, gyms, small mom and pop stores. They're the ones that are suffering from this. And yeah, I mean, there's been a major consolidation by the big multinational players like Amazon and others. And they're making huge amounts of money. I mean, it's very ugly. I think Trump has tried to stand up to it. I don't think we're going to get any opposition to it now. Mike?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that he was trying to take down the swamp.
Right.
And the trouble is that the swamp is very powerful. And I think, people can talk about why did you appoint this guy and why did you appoint that guy? But when you're looking for guys to appoint, most of them are in the swamp, unless you're going to do this worldwide talent search. You can ask that about so many of his people. Barr, for heaven's sake, who pro bono represented the guy that shot Vicky Weaver. I mean, all these people were terrible, but they hang around long enough and they're part of the system.
Yes, and they're corrupt. And Trump, I mean, one of the things I suppose we could criticize him for was he wasn't always the best judge of character in terms of whom he brought in. And you have a guy like Bill Barr who spoke eloquently on conservative values, but he didn't do diddly squat in terms of going after real criminals. And then apparently he withheld information about the Hunter Biden laptop, which has a huge amount of criminal evidence on it. Even, I mean, if he had revealed that, and it would have been in his right as the Department of Justice to do so, there would never have been that phony impeachment, and Biden probably would never have been a viable candidate. And
Charles, can I?
Yeah, please, Paul, go ahead.
I'd like to respond to what you just said, and I'd also like to make a comment, please.
Sure, please.
If you watched Michael Harrington on the wonderful show Free to Choose with Milton Friedman.
Oh, I love that.
When you just mentioned the great, I guess you were leaning towards the Great Depression of those programs. Those programs saved the oligarchs in the United States. It created a monopoly for them and an oligopoly. And Michael Harrington admitted this to Friedman, that the very people on Monday that were complaining about big government and the New Deal coming in actually saved and grew their institutions like the Rockefeller Foundation and other programs, which I can get into. But putting that aside, when I see Trump at the World Economic Forum complimenting Klaus Schwab, I mean, Charles, have you ever read that?
You're talking about the Great Reset. Yeah, I mean, been hearing about
complimenting just the World Economic Forum alone. That's the institution, these utopians who are against nationalism. And you can't tell me that Trump doesn't know and understand that. Listen, globalization globalization made some very people rich, and Trump said he was going to come in and sort of give some of that back to the United States, almost mercantilism versus a Hamiltonian protectionist type of war. And on Monday, he's complimenting Wall Street and how it's getting increasing, this and that. And I don't like how Trump doesn't mention BlackRock and State Street and these other passive investment firms that they own like $40 trillion of assets. And BlackRock has a company called BlackRock Solutions where they go in and they work for central bankers and foreign corporations.
I understand that, and I know that
all this crazy stuff. We have to fight all that, Charles. I have an anti-federalist view. I mean, if you want to talk about the fights between Patrick Henry and John Marshall or George Washington, and how the anti-federalists, what their opinions were. I mean, this is like, I just don't. I can't have it both ways. Where Trump is one day saying we're going to be a protectionist, we're going to bring everything back.
Well, you know what? I mean, I think that Paul, he probably has had to work with these people to an extent because this is the international elites, and it's a combination of business interests and government interests and cultural interests that all get together, and they kind of informally run the world. I mean, they've been doing so since the days of Cecil Rhodes. But I think that at the same time, it should be noted that Trump at the Davos conference, he very publicly stated, and some of the people even applauded this, including Macron, that he would be putting America first as the president, and that they should retrospectively put their sovereign nations first, because sovereignty is a progressive idea. And I think that that had an impact. But I do think, look, I mean, we can't be purists here. I mean, Trump is working in a system that exists. But we can understand where you can have victories, where you can have them. Anyway, Mike?
Would George Washington be going to London complimenting the British East India Company? That was one corporation with a few treasury regulations that set off the American independence. Now you have 33,000 multinational corporations, according to the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. Granted, 187 of them own 80% of the wealth, with hundreds of thousands of regulations. I mean, listen, let's just call it.
No, we're stuck in this web, and I think that there's been talk from people who kind of know the inside on Trump, and this one I will include Bill Still from the Still Report, who I recommend. He's a YouTuber. I don't know if he's still on the air, but
I have his books. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's been around since the '60s. He's a good, solid journalist, and he's got inside contacts. And that is that if Trump had been reelected, he was probably going to dismantle the Federal Reserve System. But of course, that ain't going to happen because he wasn't reelected, and at least not in the sense that he's going to serve.
Well,
anyway,
what I
Paul,
would say is that if Alexander Hamilton came back, I don't think he'd be so pro-federalist anymore.
No, and also Alexander Hamilton, let's not forget, he did establish the first bank of the United States, but it had a 20-year charter.
Yeah.
It wasn't for permanent. You didn't view it as a permanent institution. And
well,
I'm sorry. Yeah, please.
According to Harlow Giles Unger, who's a wonderful historian, Washington and Hamilton did a lot of different things that Jefferson and Madison. In fact, that's why Jefferson and Madison started the first faction, anti-presidential party. Jefferson quit as Secretary of State because Washington and Hamilton started doing things, including the first bank of the United States, that wasn't in the Constitution. And that was the first political party, actually, the anti-administration.
No, that's
party.
Interesting. And that's a fair point. And when Hamilton did implement the charter for the first bank, he made reference to implied powers in the Constitution, which of course started this whole ball rolling. Him and also Marshall did the same thing on the Supreme Court. And those were, events that possibly could have led to both good and evil. Let's put it that way.
Well, there weren't any Simon Pure individuals here.
Right.
Where Jefferson's falling out occurred with John Adams, and notwithstanding that he ran against him, was that Adams, I believe, was rightly horrified by the French Revolution, and Jefferson thought it was just peachy keen. So there's no one that I know of.
No, but I will say that I think all of those
all the way through.
all those people were patriots, and they might have had different visions for moving forward, and they all sides had pluses and minuses. I don't think that the first Bank of the United States was a bad idea either, because it assumed all the debts of the states, and it created actually a very positive credit system. The first bank is not the same thing as the Federal Reserve, in that the first bank actually was a publicly owned bank, mostly owned by Congress, and the interest did go toward the government to help build infrastructure, unlike the Federal Reserve today, which is private and which is I don't know.
Yeah.
Look,
Well,
I don't know.
the Federal
Listen,
Reserve-
Paul, I'm getting nervous even talking about this.
Oh,
To
Charles,
tell you
can I
the
say
truth.
Charles, please let me say one quick
Please,
fact I'm sure
quickly.
you and your guests will love. John Marshall, in all those cases he adjudicated, how many times do you think he referred to the most, I told you this before, the most important moment in American history, which is the ratification, forget about the Federalist Papers, the ratification of the Constitution, something never taught. How many times do you think John Marshall mentioned that in his Supreme Court decisions?
Well, look,
Zero.
the ratification of the
Zero.
Constitution was, in a sense, a second American Revolution. I mean, it was an overthrow of the
absolutely.
government. I support that,
Absolutely.
though. I think we needed to have a stronger central government than
They
we
didn't have
had
that
under the
authority,
Articles of
Charles.
Confederation.
They didn't
Anyway,
have that authority, Charles. It was a coup. They didn't have that authority.
no,
Charles.
but well, maybe not, but I think that it was necessary at the time. And I think that were the facts on the ground. Anyway, listen, Paul, I appreciate you joining me. Thank you.
God bless. God
Same
bless.
here, same here. All right.
A lot of very knowledgeable callers.
Well, hopefully, I mean, that's what
Yeah.
I'm hoping to do here, Mike. I want to develop a program where we can really shoot the breeze and really delve into interesting issues. Let me give out the number again, by the way. You're welcome to join the program. We are live Monday through Friday from 12 to 1 or 2, depending, at least from 12 to 1. 617-396-4958 is the number. I can take your call. You know, I understand, I've been told by someone that I'm the only person actually doing this, which is doing a live program on the internet and taking calls. It's almost like an old-fashioned radio show. 617-396-4958. Now I have to figure out how to monetize it, but that's another story. Anyway, Mike, what else is going on?
Well, I suppose you could charge people to call in, but
No. It's free. Come on down.
yeah, of course. But I think it's a good idea, and you're getting some good calls.
Yeah.
People that have some background, and maybe it's just typical for our side that you just don't have these fire-breathing Howard Zinn types that
Oh my God.
would populate other shows.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I saw, speaking of whom I follow on TikTok, Robert B. Reich, former Labor Secretary under Clinton.
Oh yeah, he's one of my favorites.
Oh my God, he's coming out. Him and Lawrence Tribe, I also follow him on Twitter. He's coming out. I mean, we have to take Senator Josh Hawley and Senator Ted Cruz and have them removed and censored and put into, like, you know, no-fly terrorists. And I mean, I'm like, I sent him an email saying, why not just do like you did after the Bolshevik takeover and do to Nicholas II? Take them and their families, bring them down to the basement and open fire. You know, it's like it's just insane.
Well, if they thought they could get away with it, they probably would. I mean, I have to tell
Exactly.
you, I noticed even back in late high school, early college years, that these liberals were all like this. They were all fascist.
Mm.
You know, they would try to be polite and friendly about it, but when you got into these meetings, it was unbelievable. I mean, the only difference was the people that were the actual bomb throwers
Mhm.
compared to the ones that talked about it. But that was the only distinction that I saw. And it was just appalling. And now it's coming out.
Well, it's coming out, and maybe this is an opportunity, hopefully, where we can learn something, we can expose this, and the American people will see this and be horrified.
Who's answered Larry Tribe back, though? Has
Oh my
anyone
God.
told Larry Tribe?
Talk about tin hat conspiracy theorist. He's completely off the charts.
Yeah.
I mean, his stuff during the impeachment, and this is a former Harvard law professor, you know, was considered for the Supreme Court. I mean, it's embarrassing, actually. It's really a disgrace what he's into, but it exposes this radical agenda. He doesn't make any bones about it. Him, and also you have the nerve. I follow Dan Rather. Oh my God. Here's a man who was fired.
What a masochist. Okay.
He falsified, he forged documents to go
Yes.
after Bush and was fired for it. And he's now preaching, integrity in media. And he has a new institute, the Dan Rather Integrity Institute. It's almost like, it's just like George Orwell. I mean, it's like whatever, it's bizarre.
Well, this is almost like Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Oh my God! What a
speaking. I mean, here's it. Yeah, he's not exactly a paragon of moral virtue.
And here it is. Trump is down in his last week, and he's like, does he want to try to kiss up to the establishment again? He hopes to get a comeback. Let's not forget. I mean, here's a guy who was, sleeping with the maid and had children, and he made some kind of pro-Nazi statements when he was younger, and he's now going to stand up and take a shot at Trump when he's down. I mean, what does he think? He's all of a sudden the left is going to love him? Probably they will.
Maybe he wants to be one of the cool kids again. I mean,
yeah, exactly. It's like
the funny part of that whole affair with the maid, which was known, I guess, in California, maybe more than the rest of the country, was that he was able to pull it off for a long time.
Right.
That Maria didn't seem to suspect until the kid started growing up, and there was an uncanny resemblance to the governor, and he had to admit it at that point, which then promoted this kind of bizarre linking of Maria and this woman as co-victims or something in this affair. So no, he's not the first person that I would expect to pronounce on moral issues. But let's face it, there's another guy who's popular in conservative circles by the name of Dennis Prager,
right?
Who is not in his personal life is not exemplary.
What about it?
Well, I really don't need.
Don't say anything that hasn't been published.
No. This is been published. I don't need someone who's been married 3 times.
Oh, okay.
To explain, and I've written a couple of articles on how he has absolutely no knowledge of scripture whatsoever, yet sets himself up as this massive expert.
Right. I thought he was a rabbi, but he's not.
Yeah, but so the thing is that I guess you're forced to take what good there is out of what authority. You can't go back, whether you're talking about Jefferson or any of these people. You're going to be able to find something that you don't like, but then viewed 250 years later.
You have to view them in the context of their times, and I think that in the context of their times, our founding fathers were great patriots, even though they completely disagreed on certain issues, and I include in that Hamilton. I don't think that he's comparable to people today.
Yeah, but I think what we have to do here is, promote what's going on truthfully, and figure out some way to counteract
what's coming down the pipe. I know this is something that we have to step back and reflect a little bit on where to go from here, and it's going to take a while, but there are certain things that I see as positive, besides the fact that there was a red wave in the election, that every race, I think except one on the federal level, was won by Republicans, all the contested House races, and that the Senate is now evenly divided 50-50. You have the Republicans taking 2 more state houses. You've got Republicans winning massively on a local level. You have state legislators who are now more aware of their constitutional functions going forward. I think that these are all things, plus the fact that I think Trump won, probably even the popular vote. I think that maybe the incoming Biden administration, they're going to be careful because they know that they have a midterm in 2 years. And plus they want to succeed. and by doing so, they know they have to stick with the Trump policies because they've been successful. So, if they do that, then I'm okay with that. I think that if they try to, if they're taken over by the left wing of the party, then we'll have a more stark contrast, and it may not be pretty, but at least we can further expose what we're looking at here. Because basically, in spite of all of this, I think the American system, the American institutions, the American people, that we're all intact, and that enough of us know what the hell is going on, and that Trump has unleashed a movement
Oh, yeah,
that
yeah,
that
without
is
any
not going to
question.
be stopped.
Yeah, there's a couple of things going on. If they really try pushing it to the left too hard, it's going to backfire in two ways. One is backfire publicly, but also will divide, or if not, at least expose the nature of what appears to be the Democratic Party. Saying that, I'm a little dismayed how all the Republicans, or so many Republicans, have gone under their way to abandon Trump,
Oh,
including these. And then on the non-political, the columnists, even the so-called conservative ones, that are now getting in X number of columns to show that, well, Trump blew it, and you just
you know
write
what?
the
They
exact right
think that
words.
I think that they think that the new regime, they want to get jobs.
Yeah,
They want to have all these Trump people jumping ship. They want to be hired by CNN, to do commentary. I mean, they all see, that if you're too supportive of Trump, you could be purged. And so, yeah, they're cowards. Anyway, Mike, I just want to wrap up with a great quote that I have here, because I'm about to publish a new book, not a book, more of a pamphlet,
right.
a short book on the election. It's going to be out hopefully by this
Oh,
week.
wow.
And I found a great quote from the Japanese admiral who masterminded the Pearl Harbor attack.
Oh, Yamamoto.
Yeah, Isoroku Yamamoto. He said in his diary, quote, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." And I think that's very applicable to where
Wow.
we are now. Anyway, so Mike, what do you have up in terms of your latest columns, and where can people see them?
Again, on Health News Digest, we talk about some of the soft underbelly of this COVID ongoing propaganda, and various studies and things that have come out that are counter to the conventional wisdom. And these studies are still getting published. I mean, there is some science that goes on. There's one that I didn't mention that I may in the future. There was a situation in Denmark, which has actually been pretty good about this. They had an outbreak. So bottom line, in one particular set of counties, they did very restrictive lockdown. The other didn't do anything.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, there was essentially no difference. So,
Yeah, by the way, I saw a statistic showing that the number of deaths in this country from disease has not changed from 2020 to 2019.
yeah, I mean, the trouble is with this excess deaths thing is it's kind of a dinked statistic, because you have to come up with the so-called average number of deaths, and they'll pick certain years to average.
Right.
Other people insist, no, that's not the case. And the problem is that the agency that's charged with doing this is the CDC, that's massively conflicted in this affair for a whole number of reasons. So it's very sad. You just can't get the data. And one of my good friends, who's actually a conservative economist, these economists are into data. And it's impossible to convince him, well, Al, the data sucks. I'm all for data also, but there's no data integrity. And that concept does not register with these kind of people somehow.
Yeah, we have to. I mean, it's an interesting subject. I'd like to have a data scientist on to talk about how data is gathered and what how it can be slanted. Anyway,
it's an absolute outrage in healthcare.
Yeah.
If people knew how little data was used to support these big precepts, you'd go nuts. But
It's an interesting subject. We should do some further research on it. A good friend of
Yeah.
mine is actually getting a degree in data science, and so
Oh,
I'm
good.
interested in it. Anyway, Mike, listen, I want to thank you for joining me as always.
yeah, it's always fun, and give my best to your executive producer.
Thank you.